Welcome to Commonwealth Policy Center's Candidate Forum. I'm your host, Cole Cusick. Today, Republican candidate TJ Roberts joins us regarding his bid to represent Kentucky House District 66. In May of 2024, he defeated former state representative C. Ed Massey in the primary by a margin of 48 percentage points. His Democrat opponent was invited to participate in this forum, but chose to not respond. Lastly, House District 66, the district covers a portion of Boone County, including Burlington and Hebron. Welcome, TJ.
Thank you for having me on, Cole.
Yeah, you're welcome. So the first question today, TJ, is why are you running for office?
So I'm running because Boone County and Kentucky writ large deserves government that actually fulfills just the role of government, which is to protect life, liberty, and property. We need principled conservatives in Frankfort, and at the end of the day, I saw that Representative Rawlings was running for state senate and decided that I would be an adequate person to represent the interests of Boone County and Frankfort, that I would have an understanding of our constitutional liberties and the essentials of the processes in Frankfort, that I feel that I would be able to get results for Boone Countyans that the people deserve and demand.
Yeah, I know you just came out of a very contentious primary in the district. We had a candidate forum prior to the primary where you and your opponent had debated on several issues. What did you learn from that primary about the district you're running in and what your voters want to see from you if elected?
So the thing that I learned was something that I already had a feeling was the case, and it's that for the people of House District 66, that government should be protectors of faith, family, and freedom. It shouldn't be much more. Generally speaking, the churches, the communities, the families, these are the guiding principles of society that should actually be organizing how our society functions, not a centralized force that has control over several million people, right? That generally speaking, problems are better solved at the community level than at the government level, than at the state level, than at the federal level. I learned that the people of Boone County genuinely believe that, and that they are a strong, resilient, faith-centered people, and it truly is an honor to be a part of that. And I would say that my victory margin in the primary shows that that was the overwhelming mandate, is that they wanted someone who was going to focus on letting the churches and the community solve the problems, rather than having the government have the government come in and pretend to be the savior of everyone's issues.
Yeah. Your race, I think, was the most interesting race around the state. You had a lot of eyeballs from Frankfort, from the local media on your race. There was a ton of money spent and raised. There was endorsements from both sides in the Republican primary, but you won, and really a landslide victory. And if I remember correctly, you were one of the top vote getters in all the state in the Republican primary. What was the difference between you and the candidate in the last race that you think really made the difference on the policy issues?
I think the thing that made the difference was that I don't come from the political class. I was raised by a single mother who was raised by a single mother, and we've had our struggles, and we get to see firsthand what it's like to be an everyday Kentuckian. I lost my father at a young age to a drug overdose, so I got to see I got to grow up understanding the issues that the everyday Boone County and the everyday Kentuckian faces. And I think that created a contrast, whereas my opponent, he held some form of elected office every year since the year I was born until 2022. So he was consistently in Frankfort. He was insulated from the issues of the people. That's not a personal attack, by the way. I'm glad that he was blessed to have a lifestyle of that way. That being said, the average Kentuckian doesn't get to live insulated from the issues facing the everyday Kentuckian. And I was actually on the ground, got to see that government is almost never the solution to the problems. It's almost always the cause of the problems, if we're being completely honest with ourselves. And as a result, I was more focused on what are we going to do to ensure that the actual problem solvers are empowered in our society. right? For example, 2020, when the churches were shut down, I decided to go to church anyway. I faced potential prosecution and as a result, sued Andy Bashir in federal court. Luckily, I won in the Sixth Circuit. And it just shows, like, in these times of crises, governments, they don't want to solve your problem. They want to take more power for themselves, whereas they were trying to suppress the people who were actually solving the problems. Your churches, your families, they were trying to restrict your ability to be with your family, to be with your faith community. And I think that just created a contrast between me and my opponent where, yeah, I was involved in activism at the time, but that was more just a hobby for me. I was more trying to just provide for my family, make sure that the way of life that I have of a Christ-centered family would remain legal at the time. That was really it for me.
Yeah, those are good points. You are definitely young to be on the political scene and to be running for state office, though I don't know if you would be the youngest one that would be elected here in Kentucky. It would be close to it. But you've garnered a lot of endorsements in your run here for office. Your website states the NRA, NAGR, National Association of Gun Rights, Kentucky Right to Life, Northern Kentucky Right to Life, Republican Liberty Caucus, and you've got some larger name politicians like Congressman Thomas Massie, state reps Steve Rawlings and Savannah Maddox, and then also former presidential candidate and Congressman Ron Paul. How does someone who's as young as you, how do you garner these endorsements that are even at a national level?
So in politics, one thing that I always focus on is one of Morton Blackwell's statements. Never trust someone fully until you've seen them stick out a fight that they know they were going to lose. I've done that repeatedly. I have been involved in political fights, whether that be issues or elections that I knew in all likelihood wasn't going to be a winner, but it was because of my dedication to the idea of limited government, to the ideas of our founders, that I was able to get these endorsements. In 2019, for example, I was heavily involved with the fight for constitutional carry to make sure you don't have to go to the government for permission to defend yourself and your family. That was one of the first big fights that, in many ways, I was concerned we were going to be losing. Our sponsor in the House was Savannah Maddox, and she was a first-term representative. And generally speaking, first-term representatives, they generally don't get bills done anywhere. So we stuck through the fight. We knocked on doors. We made phone calls. We made sure that the legislature knew that the time for fully preserving Kentuckians' right to self-defense was right here, right now. So that's, I think, why those organizations came in. The Republican Liberty Caucus, Dr. Ron Paul, I think that comes from just, one, standing up against the tyranny that we saw in 2020. My time as, though brief as an attorney, fighting for the rights of average Kentuckians and still fighting for their rights through the legal system as well, was part of it. With Dr. Ron Paul, I was part of his initial class of summer scholars discussing the importance of a restrained foreign policy, of what our founding fathers envisioned, of actual limited government, of when you put your hand on a Bible and you raise your right hand and you take an oath to the United States Constitution, that it's not just some ceremonial thing. It's an actual oath that you have to keep. And that's one of those issues for, I think, most of these, is that I have no intention of perjuring myself when I enter office. So I think it's my dedication to the Constitution that prompted that. The fact that from a young age, I've been heavily involved in fighting for constitutional conservatism. And people have seen what happens when I'm under pressure, and it shows that I don't back down from my oaths.
Yeah. One of the biggest issues that's going to be on the ballot this year, yes, we have the presidential election, congressional and Senate races as well, but is going to be Amendment 2, which will allow the voters to change, if they so choose, to allow the Kentucky Constitution to change it, to allow educational opportunities to be funded by the state House and Senate and by the General Assembly in Kentucky. Now, your opponent has publicly opposed Amendment 2 and said that it will, quote, dismantle public education. So, TJ, will it dismantle public education? And then where are you going to land on Amendment 2 this season?
The only reason that anyone would believe that giving parents a choice would dismantle public education is if they believe that our school system is so bad that that the critical mass of parents would pull their kids out of the school to where the school can't function anymore. I'm not of that opinion. I went to Boone County Public Schools from first grade through 12th grade. I turned out okay. I would say most of the credit goes to my family, but I had some great educators. I had some great mentors through my public school opportunities. Amendment 2 is simply giving parents a choice. So it's absolutely not going to dismantle public schools. If anything, it's going to make public schools stronger because it's going to incentivize competition, which always leads to a better quality at a better price. Because when there's competition, there's opportunity to ensure that if someone's not getting what they deserve, they can go elsewhere for it, right? So my opponent's statement that this is going to dismantle public schools fundamentally demonstrates her belief that our government schools would not survive if parents had a choice. I disagree with that proposition. So I will be voting yes on Amendment 2.
Kentucky is at a crossroads. We can choose to give in to the radical left, or we can choose to engage the culture in a God-honoring way.
I started the Commonwealth Policy Center because I believe that Christians have a responsibility to influence government and society to the glory of God. While the Commonwealth Policy Center's made a significant impact, our work isn't finished. If you'd like to join our movement working for timeless values, then head to our website.
To learn more, go to CommonwealthPolicyCenter.org.
If you're just tuning in and watching the program, we're interviewing Republican candidate for office, TJ Roberts. So you've been in vocal opposition to Governor Beshear on many issues, and most recently, last week on Friday, September 20th, you were involved in a press conference we hosted in opposing his recent executive order banning conversion therapy, as it's been called, through state agencies and by anybody who's certified or licensed by the state. Now, you brought up constitutional arguments for why that executive order should not be in place. Share that with the listeners and the viewers.
Certainly. So the primary constitutional issues that I discussed was the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, particularly the free speech clause and the free exercise clause. On the free speech clause, it is a quintessential violation of the First Amendment to engage in viewpoint discrimination. Government cannot say that a speaker has the right to express opinion A, but not opinion B. That's facially unconstitutional. There's no balancing of interests to do at that point. Well, Andy Beshear's executive order said licensed psychiatrists are not permitted to dissuade minor children from adopting LGBT identities, but they are allowed to persuade them to do so. So they said psychiatrists cannot express opinion A, but they can express opinion B. That is wrong. That is fundamentally unconstitutional. Even conversion therapy bans that have gone through legislative bodies and have been struck down, for example, in the 11th Circuit, didn't get that brazen. So that's the free speech argument. Then the freedom of religion argument comes down to the fact that Andy Beshear's order has this bevy of secular exceptions, for example, if they're trying to affirm an LGBT identity, or if they're trying to assist a person undergoing a gender transition, then that doesn't count as conversion therapy. So those are secular exceptions, and we have Supreme Court case law, Tandon versus Newsom, that says that if the government has a rule with a secular exception, it is no longer neutral and generally applicable, which means that the government not only can, but it must offer religious exceptions. There's no religious exception stating that people who have a sincerely held religious belief that this is essential to their ministry or to their advocacy for matters of the eternal, there's no exception like that in this order. So there's a free exercise clause issue. And I reminded people, and I'll remind the people here today, this isn't the first time that Andy Beshear has run afoul of the free exercise clause. In 2020, I almost went to jail for going to church under Andy Beshear's lockdown orders. the same lockdown orders that kept Walmart open, that kept Home Depot open, that kept big corporate offices open, right? The issue wasn't that there was a lockdown, at least in the eye of the First Amendment. The issue was that Andy Beshear accepted so many secular institutions from his general order that it no longer became general. And that's the case here. So you would have thought that he would have learned his lesson on that. But also further, you have another constitutional issue, and this is a state constitutional issue. Kentucky's constitution has some of the strongest separation of powers issues between what the legislative, executive, and judicial branches can do. And our Kentucky Supreme Court case law is abundantly clear. The governor does not get to write the law. The governor can only issue executive orders to the extent that the legislature has delegated authority to him to do. There is no delegation of authority on this. In fact, we can just look to the fact that for several years, there have been various so-called conversion therapy bans introduced in the legislature, and none of those bills have moved. What does that say? It says that the legislature hasn't spoken on this issue, and therefore Andy Beshear has no authority to do this. And that's one of the things that I've said. If Andy Beshear wanted to make his order legally binding in Kentucky, he's more than welcome to resign and introduce the bill. It's, of course, going to get struck down in federal court on those First Amendment grounds that I mentioned before. But the procedure matters too. So his order is substantively and procedurally unconstitutional.
Switching topics over to healthcare, in Northern Kentucky, certificate of need has become a major issue, with there only being one dominant provider for many different services in Northern Kentucky. And I know that was a major issue in your race. Is there anything else, and you can speak to the certificate of need issue if you'd like, but is there anything else in the healthcare realm that will help bring down costs or improve quality of care for citizens in Kentucky, and especially in your district?
So I think there's several things that can be done. Certificate of need reform is one thing. It's needed. It's essential. As I was talking about with schools, competition breeds excellence. And realistically speaking, it's not an attack on the institution that is currently holding the monopoly in Northern Kentucky to say that there should be competition. It's just simply stating we should be opening the market to let patients have a choice. And so I'm open. So I want reform. I'm open to hearing other sides of the argument, but ultimately, having looked at the studies, having looked at the bills, we need to reform certificate of need. But there's so much more as well that we can do to ensure that healthcare costs are lower and that healthcare quality is higher. One example is Kentucky has much higher regulations on people who are in training for healthcare. It's a lot more difficult to get hands-on experience like in the new fields. And as a result, people go across the river to get their training. And as a result, they wind up working in those areas across the river. I think that deregulation on these outdated regulations is one way that we can do this to make sure that we have a greater workforce development in our healthcare field. That's one way that we can do it. Another one that we can also do is we can focus on making sure that that the way that we have our benefit reform is done in a way that's actually conducive to prices that make sense. And that can be done through incentivizing competition. That can be done through a bevy of issues. But at bottom, I believe that government hasn't been the solution to this issue. It's been the problem. We can see as soon as Obamacare became a thing, healthcare costs skyrocketed, insurance premiums skyrocketed. So that was a mistake. The individual mandate was a mistake. Our healthcare system is too government run. It's not the people who are calling for Medicare for all that's going to make healthcare affordable. It's going to do quite the opposite. But what we need more free markets. We need more competition, and we need more innovation in our healthcare market to make sure that the healthcare that our Kentuckians are receiving is both excellent and affordable.
Yeah. And there's so much at the federal level too that many times our hands are tied at the state level of what we can provide. One of the last questions is about taxes. The state here in Kentucky, the General Assembly, has moved twice to lower the state income tax if it meets certain thresholds. Now, where are you on taxes? What rate do you believe it should be at, the state income tax? And do you see any other taxes that you would like to eliminate, or any other types of policies regarding that issue?
0%. I don't believe the government is entitled to your earnings. It's yours. I believe that the income tax is remarkably immoral in that it holds you back from doing what you believe is best for you and your family. I think it's an outdated tax system. It's something that the founding fathers did everything in their power to avoid from coming over to the United States. It took a constitutional amendment to introduce the income tax at the federal level, and I don't like it at the state level either. Other taxes that I think need to go. I think we need to look at property taxes as well. Our property taxes are too high, especially for senior citizens and young people. If you're under the age of 40, like myself, the American dream of home ownership is becoming all the more unlikely, and our tax structure in Kentucky is not helping facilitate home ownership. That's something that I think that we can do, is exempt various groups from property taxes as we eventually phase it out. So that way you truly own your property. I'm of the opinion that you don't own something if you have to pay someone every year in order to keep it. So property taxes is one of those issues for me. And by the way, people are going to immediately ask, where are we going to afford, how are we going to pay for these tax cuts? Well, I reject the premise of that question. To say that we have to pay for tax cuts first assumes that it's the government's money in the first place. It's not. Government's not entitled to money. I'm not entitled to political power as your representative. I'm entitled to the power that the people consent to being given. And that's why one of the first things that I'm going to introduce as a state representative is the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. Now, if I told you that there's a state where before a new tax can go into effect or a tax increase can go into effect, that it has to go onto the ballot, has to list off what's getting taxed, at what rate it's getting taxed, how much this is going to cost the average Kentucky family, and where that money is going to go. You'd think I'm talking about Texas or Florida or Alaska or New Hampshire, those free states where taxes are remarkably low, but it's not. It's Colorado, actually, and it's been that way since the early 1990s. This has been the one thing that has kept Colorado from becoming a mini California. And by the way, in Colorado, the first $70,000 of your property tax on your residence is completely exempt from any property taxes. The sales tax is less than ours. It's 2.9%. The income tax is just right around where ours is right now. It's 4.25%, with us being 4%, hopefully 3.5% come January. So it's amazing to see a traditionally blue state have such low taxes. And the reason why is the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. It tells the people, this is what we're taking your money for. This is how we're going to spend it. And this is how much it's going to cost you. And they let the people decide. It's a remarkable thing of how if we actually follow the principles of consent by the governed, essential services still get funded in Colorado. There's no doubt in my mind they'll still get funded in Kentucky. It's just that we have a more people-centered tax structure. And that's one of those top issues for me, is because Kentucky, we're not a taxpayer-friendly state right now. We're just not. We get nickeled and dimed at the income, consumption, and property level, at the state and local level, and consequently, we don't bring in business. We don't bring in workers. We don't bring in new homeowners. So I think that a revolution in our tax system through the Taxpayer Bill of Rights is an essential move to ensure that Kentucky brings ourselves into the modern world, so that way we can have prosperity while keeping our identity.
Yeah, that's a great point, TJ, and it sounds like a great idea if you are elected to introduce that. I'd be interested to see with the legislature passing that, if they're willing to put that on the ballot. But we're running out of time, and I wanted to provide you one more chance to tell the voters why they should vote for you over your opponent on November 5th.
Sure. My name is TJ Roberts. I'm a lifelong Boone Countyan. I've been a Boone Countyan and my family's been in Boone County for multiple generations. It is the county that brought me up, and it is the county that I look forward to raising a family in. Fundamentally, I believe that my oath to the Constitution is absolute, that I am not to perjure myself. And I apologize, I just got a phone call there. I believe that our system of checks and balances, our system of federalism, and our system of protecting substantive liberty through our Bill of Rights is essential. I fundamentally believe that people, not government, should be the driving forces of our society. That your faith, your churches, your communities, and your families should be the ones making the primary decisions. That government should be there in the very extreme circumstances when your life, your liberty, and your property is at risk. That is when the government should be stepping in to defend the people. Otherwise, as so long as you don't hurt people or take their things, I believe that you should be the driver of your own decision making. So that's why I ask for your vote, is because I've been in the fight. I've seen how big government can hurt people, and I fundamentally believe limited government is the answer. Thank you.
Great. TJ, thank you for joining us, and thank you for everyone who has tuned in to watch this Commonwealth Policy Center candidate forum of House District 66. Remember, Election Day is on November 5th, and early voting begins on November 1st. Please get out and vote this election cycle. Thank you.